27 across was finished. 28 across wasn't. For 12 years, nobody finished Earl Macklin's last crossword puzzle. Not because they couldn't. Because they didn't know it was there. Ruth Macklin was 58 years old when she walked into this gas station with a cardboard box, $200, and absolutely nowhere else to go. She came to sell it. She found something her father had spent 40 years hiding. The courtroom smelled like every courtroom in America. Industrial cleaner trying to cover up decades of bad decisions. Ruth sat in that chair while a judge read settlement terms she'd already agreed to. Dennis wasn't there. He'd sent his attorney instead. A man named Felton, in a charcoal suit, who kept checking his watch. Some men take your house. Some men take your name. Dennis Macklin took 33 years and called it a fair split. Felton slid papers across the table. This is the asset schedule. The Briar Creek property, vehicles, retirement accounts, and investment portfolio remain with Mr. Macklin per terms of the agreement. You retain the Ford pickup, personal effects, and the real property located at Route 11, Goshen County. The real property. That's what they called her father's gas station. A building she hadn't seen in over a decade. On a mountain road she barely remembered how to find. Dennis's lawyers had appraised it at $14,000. Let her keep it without argument. A rounding error on his balance sheet. 33 years of marriage. This is what fit in a single box. The truck was a 2006 model with 160,000 miles. Cracked dashboard. Passenger door that stuck. Dennis had bought it for a landscaper who quit after 2 weeks. It sat in their driveway for years until Ruth started using it for errands. When the divorce was final, Dennis told his lawyer she could keep it. Ruth pulled the deed from a manila folder on the passenger seat. Macklin Gas and Service. Route 11, Goshen County. Deeded to Ruth and Macklin per the last will and testament of Earl Robert Macklin, deceased. Her father had left her the station when he died 12 years ago. She'd driven down for the funeral, spent 3 days sorting through his things, locked the door and never went back. Dennis said the property wasn't worth the taxes. Ruth hadn't argued. She never argued with Dennis about money. About decisions. About anything. That was the deal. Though nobody ever said it out loud. The drive took 4 hours. Interstate gave way to 2-lane highway, which gave way to county road, which gave way to Route 11. A ribbon of cracked asphalt climbing into the Blue Ridge through tunnels of oak and hickory. The trees were just beginning to turn. Ruth cracked the window. Let the mountain air fill the cab. It smelled like damp leaves and wood smoke. Underneath that, something older. Rock and soil and time. She remembered this road from summers as a girl. Her mother would drop her at the station in June. Pick her up in August. 2 months with Earl. Learning to pump gas and make change and check oil levels. He taught her to read a tire tread. To listen to an engine and hear what was wrong. She could change a fan belt by the time she was 12. Dennis found that amusing when they first dated. Later, he found it embarrassing. A real estate developer's wife who knew her way around a carburetor. He never said she should stop. He just stopped asking about it. Eventually she stopped doing it. The way you stop doing anything when the person closest to you pretends it doesn't exist. The road curved around a granite outcrop. There it was. Macklin Gas and Service. The station was smaller than she remembered. Single-story cinder block building. Flat roof. 2 pump islands out front, pumps locked and rusted, price displays frozen on numbers from another decade. Kudzu crawling up the south wall. Hand-painted sign above the door, faded to ghosts of letters. 1 front window with a crack running corner to corner, sealed with dried, curling duct tape. The building was standing. The walls were solid. The door, when Ruth tried it, was locked tight. She fished through the cardboard box until she found the ring of keys. The second key fit. Lock resisted, turned with a gritty click. Inside, the air was still, thick with dust. Late afternoon light through dirty windows casting pale rectangles across concrete floor. Wooden counter along back wall. Pegboard with empty hooks. Cash register in the center, drawer slightly open. And beside the register, exactly where he'd left them, Earl's reading glasses. Ruth picked them up. Her hands gentle, careful. She held them to the light. The lenses were dusty but unbroken. She cleaned them with the hem of her shirt. A reflex from childhood. When she used to hand them back to him after he'd misplaced them for the third time in an afternoon. She set them back on the counter. In exactly the same spot. 27 across was filled in with his careful block letters. 28 across was blank. Ruth walked behind the counter. Ran her hand along its surface, feeling grooves and scratches from decades of use. Her fingers found something. A seam in the wood paneling below the register. Not a crack. A seam. Straight and deliberate. Ruth knelt down. The panel was about 2 feet square. Fitted flush but not nailed. She worked her fingernails into the edge. The panel came away with a dry scrape. Inside the cavity, a leather journal. Thick, soft covered. Held closed with a rubber band. A metal lockbox. A bundle of envelopes bound with kitchen twine. Ruth's hands trembled. She slides off the rubber band. Opens to the first page. Earl's handwriting. Small, neat, slanting slightly to the right. September 14, 1981. Lent Tom Hendricks $200 for the electric bill. Wife is doing March and they can't afford to lose heat. Told him to pay when he can. He won't be able to. But that's all right. Ruth turned pages. Fixed Carol Dunbar's transmission. Charged her $30 for parts. Nothing for labor. She's raising 3 kids alone since Ray left. The oldest one helped me sweep the bay while Carol waited. Good kid. Quiet. Page after page. Entry after entry. Names, amounts, reasons. Ruth sat on the floor behind the counter reading by the last light through the windows. The sun was setting now. Every loan. Every free repair. Every bag of groceries slipped into someone's truck while they weren't looking. Spanning decades. Hundreds of entries in Earl's careful hand. Each one a record of a kindness he never mentioned to anyone. Earl had kept a running account of every family in the valley. Not their debts. Their needs. He noted when children were born. When someone lost a job. When a roof needed patching. He tracked the loans some people paid back. And quietly forgave the ones they couldn't. Ruth opened the lockbox. Inside, $412 in small bills. A set of keys. A folded document, the original deed. The envelopes. Ruth untied the twine with shaking hands. Opened one. Thank you notes. One from a woman named Linda whose family would have lost their farm without Earl's help. One from a man named Curtis who said Earl's $50 loan got him through the worst month of his life. Simple letters. Written on notebook paper and the backs of receipts. Expressing gratitude for acts of generosity that Earl had never spoken about. Not even to his own daughter. Ruth kept reading. The journal entries grew more recent. The handwriting shakier. The last quarter of the book covered the final years of Earl's life. When the station was slowing down. When fewer cars stopped on Route 11. Even then, Earl was still lending. Still fixing. Still helping. Ruth found an entry. Dated 3 years before Earl died. Her own name visible. Ruth called today. Sounded tired. That husband of hers is spending again. New car, new suit, always something new. She says she's fine. But she's not fine. I can hear it in her voice. The way she talks around things instead of about them. She gets that from me, I suppose. stubborn like her mother. I wish she'd come home. I wish she'd come home and let me teach her to change oil again. And drink coffee that's too strong. And sit on the porch and watch the trucks go by. But she won't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I just hope she knows the door is open. Ruth closed the journal. Pressed it against her chest. Outside the window, stars appearing above the ridgeline. She reached back into the cavity. One more envelope. This one different. Sealed, not opened. Addressed in Earl's handwriting. Just one word, Ruth. She opened it carefully. 2 sheets of yellow legal paper. Folded in thirds. Dear Ruth. If you're reading this, you found your way back. I always knew you would. I wrote this on a Tuesday in October. The leaves are turning and business is slow. Which means I have too much time to think. That's dangerous for an old man. I want you to know something about this station. It isn't worth much on paper. A building inspector would condemn half of it. A real estate agent would call it a teardown. But it's worth everything to the people who depend on it. I don't mean the gas or the repairs. Though those matter. I mean the fact that it's here. That someone is behind the counter. That the coffee is on and the light is on and the door is open. I know about Dennis. I've known for a long time. You think you hit it well. But a father sees what a father sees. He's not a bad man, Ruth. He's just a man who measures everything in dollars and thinks that's the same as value. Someday you'll see the difference. I hope it doesn't cost you too much to learn it. This station is yours. Not because it's worth money. But because you're the only person I trust to understand what it was for. Don't sell it. Don't let anyone tell you it's worthless. And if you can, keep the coffee on. That matters more than you think. Outside, the last light drained from the sky. The mountains turned from blue to black. The stars came out in their thousands. The way they only do where the nearest streetlight is 10 miles away. Ruth was 58 years old. Broke. Divorced. Sleeping above an abandoned gas station on a road most people had forgotten existed. Somewhere between the last page of the journal and the first star above the ridge, a thought took shape that hadn't been there when she walked through the door. She wasn't going to sell this place. Ruth woke to birdsong and the smell of dust. She washed her face in the bathroom sink. Brushed her teeth with a finger and some of Earl's expired toothpaste. In the small kitchen, she found a can of coffee in the cabinet. Still sealed with a plastic lid. She smelled it. Stale but not ruined. The stove worked on the second try. She heated water in a dented saucepan. She carried her coffee outside. Stood on the cracked concrete apron in front of the station. Looking at the repair bay. The repair bay was in better shape than the main building. Earl had built it himself in the 70s. Poured the concrete floor. Hung the doors. His tools hung organized by size and type. Each one outlined in black marker so you'd know if something was missing. Earl took care of his tools the way other men took care of their cars. Ruth ran her hand along the workbench. Her fingers found the groove she'd carved into the wood when she was 9. Dragging a flathead screwdriver while Earl wasn't looking. He'd found it the next day and shook his head. Now the bench has character, he'd said. An engine struggling on the road outside. Closer. Dying. Silence. A white pickup truck limped into view. Steam rising from under the hood. It rolled to a stop 20 yards past the building. A young man climbed out. 23, lean, sunburned. Gray t-shirt with grease stains. Torn jeans, work boots. He popped the hood, stared at the engine with focused intensity. Ruth walked over. Radiator? Hose blue. Upper one. He wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. I've got a spare in the bed. But I don't have tools. I've got tools. Ruth nodded toward the repair bay. Pull it in if it'll make it that far. The young man looked at her. At the station. His face showed calculation. The hesitation of someone used to being turned away. I can pay for the bay time. I didn't ask for money. I said pull it in. His name was Jesse Rowan. He had the old hose off in 6 minutes. Ruth found a replacement in Earl's stock that was close enough to work. She watched Jesse install it. His hands moved with the confidence of someone who'd been working on engines since childhood. Where'd you learn to wrench? My grandmother's boyfriend had a shop in Boone. I spent every summer there until I was 16. Jesse poured coolant into the radiator. Tested it. Satisfied. Haven't worked in a shop since. Last 3 places I tried didn't work out. I'm reopening this station. I need someone who can turn a wrench. Jesse looked at her steadily. You don't know me. I know you replaced that hose faster than most mechanics with twice your experience. That's enough for today. Jesse didn't say yes. Didn't say no. He closed the hood. Started the engine. Listened to it run. I'll think about it. Come back tomorrow if you decide. I'll have coffee on. Jesse drove off. Ruth watched his taillights disappear around the curve. She went back inside. She had $200. A stranger who might not come back. A station that needed $10,000 of work she didn't have. Ruth closed the journal. Looked at Earl's glasses on the counter. Dawn. Next morning. Ruth making coffee. A truck engine. Gravel crunching. Ruth looked out the window. An old Chevy pickup pulled in. Bed full of lumber. Heavy-set man climbed out. Plaid flannel, feed store cap. Hank Dawson arrived the next morning. The man stood looking at the station. Hands on hips. Ruth stepped outside. I'll be damned. You're Earl's girl. He took off his cap. Ruth Macklin. He extended a rough, thick-fingered hand. Hank Dawson. I live 2 miles down the mountain. Your daddy and I played cards every Thursday for I don't know how long. I remember. You used to bring corn from your garden. Still do. Though there's nobody to bring it to anymore. Hank walked back to his truck. Returned with a thermos and 2 ceramic mugs. Well then. You'll need good coffee. Not whatever ancient can you found in Earl's cabinet. They sat on overturned buckets on the concrete apron. Hank pouring coffee. Tell me about him. Tell me the things he didn't tell me. Hank sipped his coffee. Studied the mountains in the distance. Your daddy was a complicated man in a simple way. Worked hard. Kept his head down. Didn't talk much about himself. But he had a thing about people. Couldn't stand to see someone struggle if he could do something about it. I found his journal behind the counter. Hank's eyebrows rose. He wrote it down. Everything. Every family he helped. Every loan. Every repair he did for free. That stubborn fool. Never told a living soul what he was doing. I only knew because I caught him once loading groceries into the Sutter family's truck at midnight. He said he was reorganizing inventory. Hank shook his head, smiling. Reorganizing it right into their back seat. Ruth laughed. Sudden, unguarded. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that. Your daddy never turned away a soul who needed help. Said it was cheaper than church and did more good. Hank paused. Turned the mug in his hands. Folks around here still talk about him. Not big speeches or anything. Just quiet things. Someone will mention that their lights stayed on because of Earl. Or that their car ran another winter because Earl fixed it for nothing. Why didn't he tell me any of this? Hank looked at her directly. You know why? Because Earl didn't think it was anything special. He thought it was just what you did when you lived somewhere and had 2 hands and a set of wrenches. He didn't think it needed a name or a medal or a conversation. He just did it. They sat in silence. A truck passed on Route 11. The driver lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel. Mountain greeting. Earl Macklin died owing nothing to anyone and being owed by everyone. That was the richest a man could be. Hank left at noon. Promised to come back the next day with lumber for the porch railing. That afternoon, Ruth started working. The first week went like this. Ruth pulled kudzu by hand. Jessie hadn't come back yet. She worked alone. Hank showed up most mornings with materials and coffee. Someone's at Earl's place. Saw lights on last night. Heard it's his daughter. The one who married that developer. Won't last a month. Nobody uses Route 11 anymore. On the 7th morning, Jesse came back. Jesse got out of his truck. Duffel bag in hand. Ruth climbed down from the ladder where she'd been painting. I'll work a week. See how it goes. Ruth wiped paint from her hands. Nodded. Fair enough. Jesse carried his duffel bag inside. Community members left food, firewood, supplies on the porch. Anonymous. The first customer came 3 weeks after Ruth decided not to sell. An elderly woman in a white sedan pulled to the pump. Are you open? We are. The woman got out slowly, holding the car door for balance. Looked at the station, at Ruth. Her eyes filled with tears. I used to come here every week when Earl was alive. He always checked my tires and never charged me. Ruth filled her tank. Checked her tires. The woman reached for her wallet. I didn't expect anyone to be here. Ruth waved off the payment for the tire check. Exact same gesture Earl used to make. Your daddy did the same thing. Exact same wave. Ruth called every fuel company within 50 miles. Most of them hung up when she described the location. A station on a road nobody drove anymore didn't justify the cost. The 5th company she called was run by a man named Grady. Earl Macklin's daughter. Your daddy kept my trucks running when I was just starting out. Wouldn't charge me full price because he said a man trying to build something shouldn't be punished for it. Grady sent a crew the following week. They inspected the tanks. Flushed the lines. Installed 2 new pump heads. Ruth signed a fuel contract with terms she could barely manage. It was a gamble, and she knew it. Jesse was in the bay reorganizing Earl's filing cabinet when the silence changed weight. Ruth was washing windows in the main room. She noticed Jesse had stopped working. That particular kind of silence. Jesse sat on a milk crate. Folder open on his lap. Staring at a single sheet of paper inside. Jesse. He didn't look up. The folder was labeled Rowan in Earl's handwriting. Clara Rowan, surgery refund $3,200, heart valve replacement, August 1994, sent through doctor's office as anonymous donation. Don't let her know where it came from. Jesse's hands were shaking. He closed the folder carefully. Pressed it flat against his knees. My grandmother. His voice was tight but steady. Holding himself together by will alone. She had heart surgery when I was a baby. She always said someone paid for it. Anonymous. She never found out who. Jesse looked up at Ruth. His eyes red but no tears. She told me that story every time I visited. Said whoever paid for that surgery was the reason our whole family existed. She looked for that person for the rest of her life. Ruth sat on the concrete floor beside the milk crate. Didn't say anything. I didn't know she'd ever been to this station. She lived in Boone. That's 40 miles from here. Earl drove to Boone sometimes. He told me he was visiting a friend. Jesse folded the page carefully. Put it back in the folder. He sat holding it on his lap. Looking at Earl's tools hanging on the pegboard in their outlined shapes. He never met me. Earl never knew I'd exist. But the reason I'm alive. The reason my grandmother survived. The reason any of us are here. Is because a man running a gas station on a road nobody uses decided to pay for a stranger's surgery. That's who he was. Jessie nodded. Stood up. Returned the folder to the cabinet. Went back to work without another word. That night, Jessie stayed later than usual. When he cleaned Earl's tools before locking up, he handled each one the way you handle something that belongs to someone you wish you'd known. $3,200 in 1994. Using the Consumer Price Index, that equals roughly $6,800 today. But medical costs have inflated faster than general prices. That same heart valve replacement surgery today would cost between $35,000 and $40,000. For Earl Macklin, running a gas station on a dying mountain road, $3,000 was nearly half a year's income. He paid it for a stranger in another town. And never told anyone. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Ruth stood at the counter. Opened it. Read. Her hands were steady but her stomach wasn't. Dennis was filing a motion to reopen the settlement. His lawyers claimed Ruth had failed to disclose the property's true value. They cited a planned state highway expansion that would increase the land's assessment significantly. They wanted the court to reopen the settlement and either award Dennis his share or force a sale. Ruth set the letter down. Read it again. She thought about calling a lawyer. She didn't know any lawyers. The ones she could find would cost money she didn't have. The phone rang. Mom. I heard about the lawyer's letter. How? Dad told me. Ruth closed her eyes. Of course he did. He says the property is worth more than what was declared. He says there's a highway coming through. There's always a highway coming through somewhere, Connie. Doesn't mean it's coming here. Mom, listen to me. If the property is worth something, why not sell? Take the money. Get an apartment. Start over properly. I'm not selling. Why not? Because this isn't about money. Silence on the line. Ruth could hear Connie breathing. Slow, measured. Holding something back. Mom, I'm worried about you. You're living in a building that should probably be condemned. Working a gas pump. And now Dad is taking you to court. How is any of this okay? Jessie fixed the furnace. The building is fine. Who is Jessie? He works here. You hired someone with what money? Connie. I'm handling it. That's what you always say. And then Dad handles it. The words landed. Ruth felt them settle. I love you. I'll call you this weekend. Ruth hung up. Sat in the dark station. Through the window, mountains black against starlight. The attorney arrived the next morning. A gray sedan pulled into the lot. Woman in her late 60s got out. Tall, straight-backed. Reading glasses on chain. Leather briefcase. Ruth met her on the porch. You're Earl's daughter. Not a question. A statement. Ruth Macklin. The attorney shook her hand. Firm, dry grip. Hank told me what's happening. I'd like to hear it from you. They sat at the counter. Legal letter between them. The attorney read slowly, turning pages with calm that comes from having read thousands of documents just like it. When she finished, she set her glasses on the counter. Right beside Earl's glasses. This is a nuisance claim. Your ex-husband's lawyers know it. And he probably knows it too. But nuisance claims work because most people can't afford to fight them. Pressure until you fold. That's the strategy. Can he win? Not if the property was never marital. Was the station ever in both your names? No. It was Earl's. He left it to me when he died. Did you and your husband ever use the property? Make improvements? Pay taxes on it jointly? Dennis never set foot in this station until 3 days ago. The attorney pulled out a legal pad. Started writing. I haven't paid the taxes on it in years. The county sent notices, but the amounts were small and I just let them pile up. I wasn't paying attention. That's actually helpful. If neither of you maintained, improved, or used the property during the marriage, it stays separate. Your ex-husband has no claim. The attorney closed her pad. His lawyer cited a highway expansion. Speculative future value isn't grounds for reopening a settlement. They'd need to prove the value was deliberately concealed at the time of the divorce. Was it? His own lawyers appraised it at $14,000. They let me keep it without a fight. Then they assessed it and dismissed it. That's their problem, not yours. She stood. Collected the papers. I'll need the original deed and any inheritance documents. Do you have them? Ruth led her to the repair bay. To the green filing cabinet. Bottom drawer. Saturday afternoon. A silver SUV pulled into the lot. New model, polished. Dennis climbed out. 61, tan, trim. Navy polo, pressed khakis. Put on sunglasses. Dennis came 3 days later. Ruth heard the engine before she saw the car. Deep, smooth, expensive. She stepped out of the bay. Dennis walked toward the station. Hands in pockets. Taking his time. Studying the fresh paint, new railing, sign Hank rehung. Ruth. Dennis. He walked toward her slowly. Nice little project. Your father's place. I think I drove out here once when we were dating. You didn't come to talk about my father. Dennis took off his sunglasses. Studied her. Measuring. I came because I thought we could talk before the lawyers make this ugly. The property is undervalued, Ruth. You know it and I know it. That highway expansion is going to pass within a mile of here. This land will be worth 10 times what it appraised for. And you want your share. I want what's fair. Fair. The word Dennis used the way other men use a handshake. You got the house. The savings. The retirement accounts. You got everything except a gas station your own lawyers called a teardown. And now you want that too. I want what the court should have considered. If the property appreciates, you'd be profiting from an asset that should have been divided. This property was my father's. He left it to me in his will. It was never part of our marriage. That's for the court to decide. Ruth looked at him. Standing in front of Earl's gas station in clothes that cost more than her monthly fuel bill. Talking about fairness. You're right, Dennis. It is worth something. Just not the kind of something you understand. Dennis stared at her. The script going sideways behind his eyes. He'd expected her to fold. I'll see you in court. He put his sunglasses on. Walked to the SUV. Pulled out. Gravel popping under tires. Ruth watched until the silver disappeared around the curve. The hearing was on a Wednesday. 12 weeks after Dennis filed his motion. 6 months after Ruth walked out of this courthouse with a cardboard box and nowhere to go. Ruth walked to the courthouse steps. The attorney met her there. Navy suit, carrying a folder with 3 documents inside. The courtroom was smaller than the one where Ruth had signed her divorce papers. Dennis sat in the front row. Felton beside him. Charcoal suit. Same watch he wore before. The hearing lasted 20 minutes. The attorney stood. Presented documents. Original deed. Earl's will. Chain of title summary. The property passed from Earl Macklin's father to Earl Macklin in 1971. From Earl Macklin to Ruth and Macklin upon his death in 2012. It was never jointly held. Never improved with marital funds. Never maintained by the respondent. She held up tax records. Tax records confirmed that neither party paid property taxes during the marriage. The property was assessed by Mr. Macklin's own legal team during divorce proceedings at $14,000 and deemed negligible. This property was separate before the marriage and separate at dissolution. There is no legal basis for reopening the settlement. The judge reviewed documents. He looked up at Felton. Counsel? Felton stood. Shifted in his seat. Said something about potential future value and equitable distribution. But there was nothing behind the words. The judge shook his head. Motion denied. The property was never marital. This matter is closed. Dennis sat very still. Ruth exhaled. Outside, the afternoon sun was warm on the courthouse steps. Ruth was walking to her truck when she heard footsteps behind her. Dennis stood on the bottom step. Jacket over one arm. Dennis looked different. The confidence still there, but something behind it had shifted. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. When did you become this person? Ruth looked at him. The man she married at 25. The man who built a career on knowing the value of things and missed the value of everything that mattered. I always was. You just never looked. Dennis stood there. No response. Ruth turned, walked to the truck. She started the engine. Sat for a moment. Drove. She drove home. The word came without effort. And she let it stay. Home. Large house. Briar Creek. Evening. Modern furniture, everything expensive and empty. Dennis sat alone in living room with a glass of bourbon. Clock ticking. House silent. No TV, no music, just emptiness. Dennis opened a photo album slowly. Young Ruth, 23, in coveralls, grease on her face, laughing while holding a wrench. Wedding photo. Ruth beaming, Dennis proud. Connie as toddler, Ruth holding her. Family photo, Ruth smaller somehow, smile less bright. Recent. Empty frame where Ruth's photo was removed. Dennis looked around the living room. Expensive art. Leather furniture. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking valley. All of it empty. Phone buzzed. Screen showed Connie calling. Dennis looked at it. Didn't answer. Set phone down. Dennis picked up the old photo of young Ruth with the wrench. Traced her face with his finger. This was the person he fell in love with. And he spent 33 years erasing her. Dennis Macklin had won everything he'd asked for in the divorce. The house. The savings. The accounts. The portfolio. He'd measured carefully. Added it all up. Made sure it was fair. And now, in a house worth $800,000, he was the poorest man in the valley. 3 months later. Spring. Dogwood trees blooming along mountain road. White blossoms against green canopy. Air smelling like warm earth and new growth. 3 months later, the dogwoods were blooming. The station was alive. The pumps ran every day. Jesse handled most of the repair work. Ruth had stopped counting the cars because there were enough. A rental car pulled into the lot. Connie got out. 2 children in back seat. Boy 9, girl 6. City clothes, wide eyes. Connie stood by the car for a moment. Looking at the station. At the children. This is where your great-grandpa Earl worked. The boys studied the building. It's small. Ruth appeared in the doorway. Big enough. Connie and Ruth locked eyes. Something passed between them. Connie smiled. Ruth showed the children the counter. The reading glasses. The crossword. Ruth opened the lockbox, now empty except for the original keys. Let them hold the brass one that opens the filing cabinet. The girl was fascinated by the cash register. Old mechanical kind with buttons that click. Ruth let her ring up an imaginary sale. Ruth showed them Earl's tools. Lifted the boy up so he could see the pegboard. The outlines around each wrench and socket and screwdriver. Ruth taught the boy to check tire pressure on a truck parked inside. Held the gauge, showed him how to press it to the valve stem. Press it here. And this number tells you if there's enough air. What if there isn't? Then you add some compressors right there. The boy pressed the gauge. Concentrated. 32. Perfect. You just did your first tire check. The boy grinned. The same grin Ruth had worn at his age. In the same bay. Learning the same things from Earl. Connie watched from the bay door. Her face. Not worry anymore. Recognition. Evening. After the children had fallen asleep on the couch upstairs, Connie loaded them into the rental car. Ruth waved from porch. Connie got in driver's seat but didn't start the engine. Connie sat in the car for 5 minutes before starting the engine. Connie gripped the steering wheel, staring at station through windshield. Ruth locking door, testing lock twice, turning off lights one by one. Connie's tears started. She wiped them quickly, didn't want kids to see. Brief memories. 3 seconds each. No sound. Young Connie watching mom defer to dad. Whatever you think is best, Dennis. Teenage Connie asking mom about college. Mom says ask your father. Adult Connie's wedding. Ruth in corner looking small. Dennis giving toast. Recent. Connie on phone with dad during divorce. Mom's being unreasonable. Connie saw Ruth through window. Strong, capable, checking something under station floodlight. Connie's expression. Realization washing over her. She understood something she'd missed her whole life. She got out of the car. Walked back toward porch. That evening, after the children had fallen asleep upstairs, Ruth and Connie sat on the porch. Long silence. Just the sound of night insects. Wind in the trees. I was wrong. Ruth didn't speak. Waited. About all of it. This place. You. Dad. Connie turned her mug in her hands. I sided with Dad during the divorce. You know that. I know. It was easier. He had the answers. He always had answers, and you just agreed with everything. Pause. Connie looked at Ruth. I didn't respect that. You were right not to. Connie surprised. What? I spent a long time agreeing because it was easier. That's not something to respect. Connie's eyes filled now. But you're not doing that anymore. No. I'm not. Stars overhead. Valley dark below. Dad called me last week. He sounded different. Quieter. Asked about you. What did you tell him? The truth. That you're doing better than anyone expected. That you turned into someone he never imagined you could be. Pause. And I said, that's because you never tried to imagine it. Ruth reached over. Squeezed her daughter's hand. He wasn't a bad man, Connie. He just measured the wrong things. They sat together. A few days later, with the sun dropping behind the western ridge, a car Ruth didn't recognize pulled into the lot. A minivan, road dusty, cracked taillight. Young woman climbed out. About 30. Faded jacket, jeans. 3 children in back seat. Youngest asleep in car seat. The woman popped the hood. Stared at engine with focused expression. Ruth walked over. Radiator? The woman looked up, surprised. Hose blue. Upper one. She wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. I've got a spare in the bed, but I don't have tools. I've got tools. Ruth filled the tank. Changed the hose. Checked the front left tire, which was low. Added air without asking. When the pump clicked off, the woman opened her purse. Started digging through it. Ruth could see her fingers moving past receipts and loose change. The quick motion of someone counting what they have and hoping it's enough. Pay it next time you're through. The woman looked up. What? Next time you drive through, you can pay then. I can't just take. Sure you can. I'll be here. The woman stared at her, eyes filling. She pressed her lips together hard. Why? Ruth smiled. Gentle. My father used to say the same thing. The woman drove away. Full tank, aired up tires. Ruth watched the minivan disappear around the curve. Next morning, Hank's truck pulled in. Something wrapped in brown paper under his arm. He walked in, set it on the counter, slid it toward Ruth. Found this in my garage. Been sitting in a box. Ruth unwrapped it. Framed photograph. Slightly faded behind dusty glass. Earl and young Ruth standing in front of the station. Ruth about 6, wearing overalls, wide grin. Earl behind her, one hand on her shoulder, squinting into the sun. Sign above them freshly painted. Pumps shining. Ruth held the photograph. Looked at it for a long time. He gave me a copy after he took it. Told me it was the best picture he ever took. Said it was the only time both of you looked exactly like who you were supposed to be. Ruth carried the photo behind the counter. Hung it on the wall. Next to Earl's glasses. Next to the crossword. 3 objects from a man who had been gone for over a decade. And a photograph that proved he'd known who she was before she knew it herself. According to U.S. Census data, between 1970 and 2020, 67% of rural Appalachian counties lost population. Main routes like Route 11 were bypassed by interstate highways. Independent gas stations, once centers of local economy, according to industry data, disappeared at a rate of 15 per year in Virginia alone. Earl Macklin wasn't a saint. He didn't solve the systemic problems killing his valley. But he did one thing. He kept the connections alive when everything else was trying to cut them. What Ruth learned, what we all can learn, isn't about going back to the past. It's about remembering it enough to build something better. Measure the right things. Earl's reading glasses. Wire-rimmed, one temple bent. The crossword he never finished. The photograph from 50 years ago. And a journal full of names and kindnesses that nobody knew about until it was too late. Ruth closes up the station at dusk. Locks the door with Earl's key. Climbs the stairs to the apartment that smells like coffee and motor oil and home. She's 58 years old. She's just getting started. People ask Ruth sometimes, "Did you save your father's station?" She shakes her head. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go." The saving happened on its own. That's usually how it works. How rich is a person? Not by what they accumulate. By what they hold together. Earl Macklin's ledger recorded over 400 acts of generosity between 1981 and 2012. Ruth Macklin continues to operate the station on Route 11. Jesse Rowan earned his master mechanic certification in 2025. The crossword puzzle remains unfinished.